When Moses died, Israel was at the most vulnerable point in its history. Everything suggested that something would happen, but nothing happened. No attack, no rupture. The text does not explain why. It is from this silence that the story begins. The text marks time with precision. 30 days of mourning. Israel remains stationary at the gates of Canaan, encamped in open ground, without walls, without a capital, without consolidated territory. Moses is dead. In any other ancient account, this would be the most vulnerable moment possible. Yet the text moves on as if none of this produces any effect. The news spreads. The surrounding peoples know. Kings observe. Even so, there is no record of attack, of threat, or of any external reaction. The text does not say that Israel was protected, nor that it was spared. It simply records no response at all. And then the most unsettling detail emerges. The narrative continues to operate as if authority was still active. The people do not disperse. Orders circulate. Boundaries remain. Nothing indicates collapse. The visible leader disappears, but the system does not fall into a vacuum. The narrative does not slow down to explain this. It moves forward, carrying the impression that whatever sustained Israel was not bound to the figure of Moses, even though no one can point to where that authority now resides. This interval passes too quickly to be accidental, and too silently to be neutral. It is with this unresolved tension that the text moves on. When the silence ends, the text does not prepare the reader. It simply records that God speaks again and moves on, as if the previous interval had created no structural problem at all. This direct transition is what produces the first sense of unease. The voice does not pass through a priest or a recognizable rite. It comes directly to Joshua before any public legitimation has been presented. The text makes no effort to justify this channel. It treats the shift as sufficient to set the narrative back in motion. The first sentence is short and definitive. Moses, my servant, is dead. There is no emotional build-up and no gradual transition. The death is declared as a settled fact, and the command follows immediately. The succession is not developed. It happens. The effect is immediate. The mission precedes recognition. Authority operates before it is explained. In other moments, Scripture tends to mark transitions with visible signs and public confirmations. Here, this does not occur. The text behaves as if validation were already implicit, and nothing reacts against it. There is no internal challenge, no collective hesitation, no demand for proof. The narrative proceeds as if that word carried enough weight to reorganize everything without resistance. The system responds before the reader has time to question the channel. The silence of the previous chapter does not disappear. It simply takes on another form. Authority returns, but not by the expected path. And the text shows no concern with making this acceptable or comprehensible. It moves forward as if the question had never been who speaks now, but why we assumed that authority depended on an intermediary. That question remains open, and the story continues without offering an answer. After the voice is recorded, the text does not return to organize the scene. It moves straight into action. Orders begin to circulate, movements are planned, and the people prepare as if the question of authority had already been resolved. Even though it has not been presented. Joshua speaks, and the people move. Instructions pass through the camp. Officers repeat them. Preparations advance. The unsettling detail is not that Joshua gives orders, but that they take effect immediately, despite the text never explaining why they should. In other moments, Scripture tends to build leadership before action. Here, the opposite occurs. Action comes first. Legitimacy is not declared. It is inferred from the effects. The text does not state that Joshua was accepted. It shows that he was obeyed and treats that as sufficient. This inversion quietly shifts the axis of the narrative. Authority does not appear as something formally transferred from one man to another, but as something already operating when someone begins to act in alignment with it. The structure resumes functioning, while the point of anchorage remains out of sight. The initial interval, marked by silence and the absence of attack, now takes on another form. The vacuum that seemed dangerous does not produce paralysis. It produces response. The system reacts swiftly, as if it had never depended exclusively on the figure who disappeared. The text does not pause to justify this fluidity. It does not explain the absence of contestation, nor does it record internal tensions. It simply moves on, carrying the impression that the authority sustaining the movement did not need to be rebuilt, only recognized in practice. This is where the fissure deepens, because if orders take effect before they are explained, the question ceases to be who is in command now, and becomes how long this had been functioning without us noticing. That question is not answered. It travels alongside the narrative. The Jordan is still there. The text makes a point of reminding us. A real river, wide enough to prevent an easy crossing, separating the people from a land that has not yet been taken. On the other side, established cities, kings in control, systems functioning. On this side, a people who have not yet entered, have not yet won, have not yet possessed. Even so, the narrative begins to treat the frontier as provisional, not as an obstacle to be negotiated, but as a limit that has already lost its force before it is crossed. Preparation unfolds as if the crossing was certain, as if resistance on the other side did not require proportional calculation. This confidence is not attributed to military superiority. The text does not describe new weapons, strategic alliances, or a decisive numerical advantage. The movement does not arise from visible strategy. It simply happens, sustained by something that is not named. This is what alters the reading. A people who have conquered nothing begin to act as if the territory were already decided. The river remains, but it ceases to function as a break. The frontier exists physically, but it no longer organizes behavior. The text does not pause to justify this inversion. It does not suggest underestimation of the enemy, nor a sudden surge of collective confidence. It simply shows that the limit stops being treated as a limit before any public victory. And the tension shifts once again. If authority was already operating before legitimation, it now begins to operate before conquest. The effect precedes the fact. The crossing has not yet occurred, but decisions already obey a logic that comes after it. The reader senses that something has changed in the relationship between the people and the space they do not yet occupy. The frontier remains visible, but it no longer governs decisions, and the text advances as if this were natural, without offering explanation. the question returns with greater weight. If leadership did not depend entirely on Moses, and if orders take effect before they are explained, what causes a physical boundary to stop containing a people who have not yet won? The text does not answer. It simply leads the reader closer to the river. From this point onward, the rhythm of the narrative changes. There is no announcement, no declared turning point. The text simply begins to move faster. Decisions that once seemed to require waiting are now carried out. Movements that used to be delayed begin to unfold without pause. While Moses was alive, many of these actions were surrounded by prolonged preparation and restraint. Now the account behaves as if waiting has lost its function. The text does not say that a barrier was removed or that permission was granted. It simply shows that time has stopped holding the story back. The reader perceives the effect before any cause. The narrative begins to move as if it were obeying an order that already existed, merely waiting for the moment to come into operation. Nothing feels improvised. Nothing feels reactive. The unease lies in the naturalness of this acceleration. The text does not treat the change as exceptional, nor does it slow down to explain it. It moves forward, as if the earlier delay had never been essential, as if time itself had only been a contingent element. This reinforces an uncomfortable impression. The problem was never a lack of external conditions. Something was being held back, not blocked. And when the interval ends, the advance happens too quickly to feel accidental. The story begins to run ahead of explanation. Consequences appear before understanding. The text offers no key. It simply advances. The faster everything falls into sequence, the harder it becomes to treat the initial silence as circumstantial. The rhythm now suggests that there was a latent order, a sequence already defined, beginning to manifest without needing to be announced. The reader is carried forward with a sense of having missed the precise moment when something was decided. The effects are visible, the decisions not, and the text does not return to clarify it. Before any decisive confrontation, the text introduces an unexpected scene. Joshua encounters a man standing before him with his sword drawn. He is not announced, not integrated into the narrative, not preceded by explanation. He simply appears in the path of the action. Joshua's question is immediate and practical. He wants to know which side that figure is on. The answer affirms neither option. It rejects the entire framing of the question, shifting the axis of the situation. The text does not hurry to identify who this man is. It offers no explanation of origin, function, or full intent. The focus is not on identity, but on response. Joshua recognizes authority before receiving any explanation. The gesture comes first. Understanding is suspended. The sword is already drawn. That matters. It is not a reaction to a recent event. It signals prior readiness, as if that presence had not been summoned in that moment, but had already been positioned before Joshua arrived. The narrative moves on without resolving this tension. Authority becomes visible for an instant, yet remains unplaced within familiar categories. It appears too late to be the beginning, and too early to be an explanation. And the text feels no obligation to clarify it. Throughout the story, The text repeats the same movement in different forms. Moses dies, and no one attacks. The voice returns without a mediator. Orders begin to take effect before they are explained. The frontier loses its force before it is crossed, and when authority finally becomes visible, it was already armed. At none of these moments does the text offer a direct explanation. It does not say where the authority was during the interval, nor why the enemies did not advance, nor how the system continued to operate without collapse. It does not fill the gaps. It simply shows the effects. The center is never presented, and yet the entire narrative is organized as if it had never disappeared. And when a text moves forward in this way without explaining what sustains everything, silence ceases to be an absence and becomes part of the message.